Welcome to Focus Friday. I am your host, Dan Mickle, and Focus Friday is a weekly vlog dedicated to starting conversations in the coaching and educational spaces, and we are powered by Soul Performance Academy. You can check them out online, soulperformanceacademy.com, and at 717soul across all social media. And as usual, you can reach me across all social media at Real Dan Mickle or visit my website, danmickle.com. All right, this week we're going to talk about errors for the win, and I want to focus on how we can use errors in practice to help us become better and win more, both on the court, on the field, on the pitch, and in the classroom. And I think one of the things that we have to get past is, it's a great saying that, if we're not creating errors, we're not making mistakes, we're not learning. While that's true and that's great, I want to focus more on how we can use and how we react to errors to help us learn in our training environments. And I think one of the ways we do it is, first, how do we address errors? Are we sure that what our body is saying is matching what is coming out of our mouths? Because a lot of time that doesn't happen. We say we're okay with errors and we want players and students to make mistakes, but when they do, we sigh or we put our head down or we kick the floor. And that's kind of giving a confusing message to the student or the athlete, saying, okay, you want me to make these mistakes, but every time I do, you react like you're disappointed in me. So they're kind of going to go back in their shell and not really push themselves. So we want to make sure, first and foremost, that what we're saying and how we're acting are on the same page. Next, when it comes to how we verbally react to errors, we need to, in a way, celebrate those errors. Not like, hey, great, you messed up, but more about, I'm really glad you made the mistake this way, because now we can look at how we can change it and tweak it to make you better at that skill. Or, this is one of the most common mistakes we see, and here's how we can fix it. And when we present it that way, it does a couple of things. One, it puts them at ease. Things are a little bit more calm. They know we're not upset about it. But secondly, they know that people have made this mistake before. They're not the first ones to go through it. And that's comforting, knowing that they're not the first. And it's easier for them to go through and start to work on things and really look at it, knowing that there's probably a solution, or at least someone they can turn to, or experiences they can turn to, because someone has gone through it. The other tool that I think is really great when it comes to errors is when you let them know that you make the same mistakes. Maybe they hit the ball incorrectly or their timing's off, and you say, when I used to play, or when I was playing, I had the same problem, and here's how I fixed it. You'd be surprised at how much younger athletes appreciate knowing that you went through the same struggles, and look where you're at. You're now the coach. You're now leading things, but you struggled with it too. So they don't feel as hopeless because you're putting that personal touch on it, as opposed to just saying, hey, you can do this better. That's an okay way, but we want to elevate these conversations, right? We want to elevate how we're training and teaching. So let's start to make it a little bit more personal. Also point out you understand why they're making that mistake. So they know about, you're looking at the thought process. It's just not a skill thing. Okay, I could see why you decided to do this in this situation, but let's try it this way, and let's try it a better way. It lets them know that, okay, they don't think you're a failure. They don't think that you're just out here doing things nonchalantly. They realize that you're doing it with an intent, and we have to fix it. Again, it's bringing that more human and warmth element into how we correct errors. We also have to encourage and challenge our players and our students to push themselves beyond their limits. And we do that by letting them take calculated risks in practice. We let them know, okay, look, in this drill, I expect there to be a lot of errors, but let's use this time to correct it. This is what we're here for. As opposed to, I have to be perfect every single rep or I'm going to get yelled at. And again, it goes back to the body language as well. How are you standing and how are you reacting to that? Another thing that we can do is we don't minimize the errors. We don't ignore them. If we minimize and ignore them, then they just become ingrained, like, it's okay. Well, they didn't seem to get too upset, or they didn't even mention it, so we'll just let it go. If it's important to you and you think it's fixable, bring it up and mention it. Now we have to walk that fine line where we make sure that we're just not hounding our players constantly. But make mention of it. Oh, Sally, there was that issue again rearing its ugly head. Let's keep an eye on that. Or, all right, we're getting closer, but that one little error is still popping up, Jim. Let's fix that. Instead of just going right into feedback mode and correction mode. Again, making it a little bit more warm and personal. It's going to put their defenses down. It's going to help them retain and analyze what you're telling them. The next one is clutch for me. Help your players and your students identify their errors. Don't just tell them they're doing something wrong. Hey, Ricky, that was a really, really good shot, but I think it probably could be a little better. What do you think? Yeah, coach, I think it probably could have been. Okay, what can we do to make that better? What do you think you can improve on to make that skill better? Don't just tell them about their technique. Have them walk through and think about it. It's going to help them process everything, learn everything, and then also it's going to help them figure out different ways. So maybe that exact same error might not happen later, but something similar to it. But because they worked through it themselves, they now have a solution or a way to fix it, as opposed to just spoon feeding them everything. Then the last one that's clutch for me is practice how we respond to errors. If you get upset in practice at serving errors, hitting errors, batting errors, and you show it and your body language shows it, it's going to happen in the game. So just as much as we're asking our players to practice and get better with their errors, as coaches, we need to get better and make sure that our feedback, what we're saying, and our body language is helpful to the player as well. So just as much as we are helping our athletes and our students, we also have to look at ourselves and our staff and make sure that we're reacting correctly to the situation and that we're creating positive error reinforcement or error correction reinforcement to our players. Because again, the last thing that we want is our mouth saying one thing, but our body language saying another, because confusion is actually worse than upsetting your players. A confused player is harder to work with than an upset or happy player. So we want to make sure that we practice on how we are giving that error correction. And I think that's a big point. And just don't let them get away with it. If a player makes a mistake and that's the end of practice, that's the end of practice. Don't let them get another rep in, because it's not going to happen in competition. Let them figure out that sometimes it's going to end like that and I have to bounce back next game, next match, and I'm going to have to play, even though I have the disappointment of how the last game or match ended. We can't be afraid to train in those situations. It may be hard. We may feel like, no, we want to end on a super positive note. But there's value in letting it end naturally like that and learning how to bounce back, either in a new drill, a new scrimmage, or it could even be the next day if it has to be. But don't be afraid to put that method on them as well. That, there is some finality to some of these actions, and we have to learn how to bounce back. And the best way to learn how to bounce back is to be put in a position where you have to bounce back. I think that's a big one that we miss a lot. All right. So there we have it for Focus Friday, talking about errors and how we foster an environment where errors can thrive to help us grow. Again, we're not training to make errors, but we need to train how to react to errors and how we can use errors to get better. But if we just gloss over them or we just spoon feed the answers every time, we're not going to grow in that situation, right? So let's make sure we're taking the time and training how to deal with errors and how we can use those errors to grow, both as educators and as our players or students. We're all going to grow from those situations, but we can't ignore them, and we have to hit them kind of head on and work on them. All right. I'll see you all here next week for the next Focus Friday. Please have a good conversation in the comments. Let's talk about how do you work on errors in your gym or on your field or in your classroom? How do you encourage growing from errors, and what can we do? Subscribe, like, share. Would love to hear from all of you. And and we'll see you next week for the next Focus Friday.